I'm Penelope Maver, and welcome to Earth Converse podcast, an exploration into our conversations and relationships with the earth, all in the hope of inspiring a deeper connection with ourselves, each other, and the earth that is our home. And today I have Raymond Hillis here, and I mentioned him in the episode 1 as having a significant, profound impact on my life. I adore this man with all my heart. He has opened my heart and my mind. He's introduced me to dream work, wholeness, integration, and ceremony. He was a guide on my vision quest, and then we worked on a one-to-one basis for about 5 years. And then last year, I actually got to sit beside him as a co-guide on a vision quest, and he's here. He's darting at the moment between LA and Santa Fe and his beautiful ranch, Dragonback Springs Ranch in Colorado. But he's here in Santa Fe, and it's just so lovely to see him. So welcome, Ray.
Well, thank you. It's with be with you.
So lovely. So how would you describe yourself?
Well, I'm a 78-year-old man who is coming around full circle to the beginning. I feel a very rising presence of my childhood. It feels, people always talk about how you focus on your childhood more as you get older, and that as memory declines, your childhood memory stays stronger and so on. And that's true biologically, I think. But there's a psychological side to it also, which is that something about the childhood years becomes more pressing to understand. I find myself wanting to go back into what my early childhood was like. And not so much out of reminiscence, but out of a sense that I'm approaching it, which is weird. But I was born 2 months before Pearl Harbor, and lived in downtown Los Angeles with my parents. And I've wondered lately how, especially with the whole virus thing, I've wondered about the world that they lived in and the emergency they felt, and the war certainly, and which had impacted them for several years before that, of course, in the European War. But it also was a time coming out of the Great Depression, which impacted them very heavily. I remember my mother telling the story about they were walking down the street, and she dropped a quarter, and it rolled into a sewer grate, and she cried because she really could not imagine losing a quarter. It was such a big event. So it leads me to realize that I grew up in a home where stress was everywhere outside, and where inside the home, I would like to know more about what it was like now too.
Can you remember, like in terms of that felt experience, what have you accessed in terms of your childhood in that respect?
Well, not so much my personal felt experience, but I know, I understand now a lot about what impacts my emotions. I had a really synchronistic event happen about 15 years ago. My aunt, my father's sister, worked for the state of California in the franchise tax board, and so she processed. It was before what I'm going to tell you about actually happened about 30 years ago. Yeah. And it was before there were computers, and so processing tax returns was all hand work. And so she sat at a desk, and stacks and stacks and stacks of tax returns would pour in on her desk, and she would go through them one by one and catalog them and do whatever they did with them. And so she's working one day, and she brushed against the pile, and one of the tax returns on the pile fell on the floor. So she reached down to pick it up, and it was my return.
No way.
Out of millions of returns, she had my return jump off her table onto the floor. She's a very religious person, and she took it as a message from God that she was supposed to call me and tell me something that she had witnessed in my childhood that she always felt I should know.
Wow.
So she called me.
Are you happy
And
to share?
hmm?
Are you happy to share?
Oh, yes,
Mm.
perfectly fine. So she said that when she was young, she's was a younger sister of my dad's, so she's probably maybe 15 years older than me, and she's still alive, in her early 90s. She said, "I have to tell you something, that when I came to visit you at your house one time, you were locked in a closet
Mm.
in your stroller because you were crying." And she said, and your mom often got to where she needed to put you in a closet because she couldn't stand hearing the crying anymore.
Mm.
And my mother was a very loving woman, extremely loving
Sure.
woman, and very warm-hearted and civil rights active. And I mean, she was a very good-hearted woman. But I think that was an indication of the stress
Yeah.
that they were living under. And so, so to me, that's kind of a momentous moment of my background. And hearing that was extremely helpful to me
I was going to
to,
say yes, yeah.
yeah, to understand that it was a difficult time, because I have very few memories of early childhood, virtually none, for until I was 4.
Mm.
And then I have a couple of memories, and then very few on through elementary school years. My memory starts when I was a teenager.
Okay, yeah, yeah. I haven't got many memories either, really, in that respect.
Hmm.
But when she told you that, did it feel like true at some level, like that, or piecing together, or what you, yeah, felt or
Yeah,
knew deep down?
yes, it does feel like there's a truth in it. It's it it adds a certain balance to the other side, which is the side of Christian love and all-embracing acceptance, and that was a side of her that I knew very well, because that side stayed very prominent in her life through all the way till her death, um, and she. Um, but it didn't feel quite complete to me.
Mm,
She really did not have much room for shadow.
mm,
Um, to her, shadow was something that was the world of the devil, and it was a world to be avoided.
mm,
And so she kind of had that belief, which I think a lot of people in religious systems have, that if you live the right life, you don't have to deal with shadow. Um, and that if you do have to deal with shadow, you're doing something wrong. Um, and so there was a certain way in which I think she felt that my family tended to feel that, I think.
mm.
Um, so see this other side, and to know that she um, was very capable of feeling and responding to shadow, that was helpful.
Yeah. And in the shadow of the cupboard, that's probably, was that
Mm,
part of your journey to go and explore shadow and explore
mm.
humanism? I wonder.
Could well,
Mm.
yes, absolutely could well have been. Most people, I think, enter their connection to Jung and his work through some crisis in their life.
Mm.
Um, it's generally something that feels like it opens up a deep crack. I think of Leonard Cohen's song about, you know, everything crack, and it's how the light gets in.
Yeah.
And that, yes, this opened up. So for me, it was the breakup of a relationship when I was 20, I guess 30. I was about 30, and a relationship ended. And she had been in Jungian analysis, and I was learning about it from her. And she recommended that I go see somebody, and so I did. And that's how it, for me, that's how that all started. And
Mm.
so I do think it's
Mm.
usually an eruption from the shadow, from the unconscious,
Mm.
um,
Mm.
triggers that
Mm.
interest.
Mm. And so looping back, and it's kind of nice. I love your, you we'll go into this probably quite often about the circular nature, and I'm going to force you to be linear around Sorry about that. So starting, like, in terms of how is your, what has been your soul journey, and or particularly your life journey through the lens of, nature and psyche, just in particular, that, from the earliest memories that you can drench up.
I think it's a process of moving from separateness, a feeling of separateness, to a feeling of connection. I think that that immersion from standing aside to becoming immersed in life, that's been the process for me. I started out very protected. Well, I was protected by my parents also. It was a very sheltered home life. We were allowed, I have a sister who's 2 years younger and a brother who's 9 years younger. I don't have much connection to my brother because of the age difference in childhood. But my sister and I went through all of it together. And there was very clearly they were very protective parents. There were lots of rules, lots of boundary fences around us, what we could and couldn't do.
Did that feel safe or restrictive? Or you didn't know any difference?
I think both. But it did feel safe, and the rules started so early that they were just natural.
Yeah.
I didn't know a world without rules. So by the time we started into school was a couple of blocks down the street, and I remember the feeling of freedom of being allowed to walk that far, to go that far away from home to school. That was really meaningful. But I lived a very protected life all the way through childhood and adolescence. I didn't learn anything about sexuality until I was a teenager. I didn't have any kind of dating life until I was 18. And then I got married at 21. So
wow, it's quite
broke
an initiation.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm happy for that marriage because we have 2 kids, but it didn't it only lasted 10 years. Because we were too young. We didn't know who we were picking.
Yeah.
We didn't know who we were.
But Psyche must have picked well, though.
Well, apparently, yeah, fortunately did, and I'm very happy. But from then on, I've lived a very single life. I tried marriage again, and again, it didn't feel right. So I've wandered through the world with partners and friends, but I'm most content when I'm alone. That continues to be true to this day.
I love that. I think that's a real, and I guess I resonate with that, although I've been, part of my journey with you is that sort of angst around that.
Yes.
Isn't it? Like wanting it to be different. And you help.
Yeah, there is an angst about that because our culture is very extroverted and relational. So from our cultures, most of our Western cultures anyway, from the point of view of the collective, there's something wrong with you if you're not totally connected to everything. Like now, if you're not on Facebook, or you're not on Twitter, or you don't know what TikTok is, which is true for me. There's the sense of needing to be connected has just been amplified by all of the technology now. Because it's available, we're all expected to need it. And if you don't need it, then what's wrong with you? So the other side of all of that, of course, is that you become more vulnerable to intrusion the more of that you get connected to. And that's what I've always been aware of is it's safe when I'm alone because nothing intrudes on me.
Yeah. And
but
go
ahead.
on.
Now, I was just going to say, I do need connection and I do need to reach out, but I like to do that in measured ways, and I like to be able to turn it off. So I have a Facebook page that I never look at. except if somebody dies.
Yeah.
Somebody in the I keep the page primarily because it's a way I would learn if I have two an aunt and an uncle still who are live in Northern California, and I'm not in touch with them now. But I know that I would hear on Facebook. I'd get an email from Facebook saying something was wrong with them, and so I keep it.
It is ironic how it's the main form now. It's sort of it's really strange. Like people's emails, I don't have anymore.
Yes.
How do you stay connected? Or I like this concept of solar together. So or this idea of being your individual, because we've talked about that in our work together about how to be that in your whole individual self and in relationship with others or nature. How do you find connection?
That's a hard question to answer, actually. How? I think, well, first of all, I guess the online kind of connection to me is feeling more and more like a filter between me and the outside world, that it's getting in the way. If I find that the more I remove of that, the more a kind of natural connection begins to happen. Like as I say that, I'm looking out my window at the trees and the connection that I can instantly feel when I look at them, and I can feel connected to anything that's real if I can take the kind of artificial connections away. So to me, that's the struggle for me now is to avoid too much artificialness to where I can't feel the real connection, the real living heartbeat. It brings to mind, there's an image, I don't know what you'll do with this, but there's an image that has occurred to me lately that you can think of life as a huge collection of pool balls, like a table billiard ball.
Yeah.
But it's not a two-dimensional surface like a table. It's a three-dimensional surface. And so all of these unlimited billions of cue balls are out there, and they're bumping into each other all the time. And I'm one of those balls, and you are one of them. My tree is one of them, and my table right here is one of them, and every cell in this table is one of them. So very quickly, every molecule, it's a pool billiard and billiard ball, and they're all shooting around in some kind of random connection, or at least it feels random. And you can add to that if you're inclined to. You can say, well, there's also a pool cue, and somebody's shooting a pool ball at all of us, and that could be God or whatever. But for me, it's there. I don't see the cue as much. I just see these balls, and they're all vibrating and somehow bouncing into each other, and I'm bouncing into things. And so relationship is not so much a matter of having to reach out and connect to anything as it is trying to filter enough of what's bombarding you so that you focus on one other ball.
I love that. Actually, I was thinking that's a really good metaphor. I love your symbolism too, but over the years, and when you're in a bubble bath or you're clouds, like atoms they do want to go together, don't they? They do want to. They do want to gravitate to each other, don't they? And it's sort of like, and it reminds me that sort of that wanting to be connected, and but the random patternness of it, that paradox there.
Well, what they say, I recently read, is that molecules are intensely drawn toward each other until they reach a certain distance, and then they are repelled from each other if they go any closer. So there is the repelling force is every bit as strong as the attraction. So there's a right distance, depending on what molecule you are and what molecule the other guy is, that these two molecules, there's a right distance where they'll feel content and stable. So yes, molecules are very much pulled together and
yeah. And going back to your billboard of the right molecule, gets closer, or or a particular molecule gets closer than another one.
Mm-hmm. So learning to feel the rightness of the distance seems to, for me, is helpful. That there's the right distance to everything, and of course the only way you're going to find that right distance is by getting too close and being pushed back, or getting too far away and getting pulled forward. So it's a dance, and it's going on constantly.
So where is your dance with nature?
Well,
because you're going from LA to Dragonback, and and just and various parts of your life, you've
Yeah, I was thinking about that this morning and thinking about talking with you, and the image that came up is this: that, well, first of all, I was born in Southern California, middle of Los Angeles, East Los Angeles. I lived very much an urban life. Nature was represented by a vacant lot across the street. There was one lot across the street that hadn't been built on. And so I could walk across the street and, as a little kid, play around in this weed-filled field. That experience of being in the center of Los Angeles continued. When I graduated from high school, I went to UCLA, which is in West LA, but still in urban Los Angeles. And then when I left there, I lived in either West or East LA, and got a job teaching in Cal State LA, which is in East LA. Taught there for 40 years. So in a way, excuse me, my life has been very urban, but starting really early in my teaching career, I began moving away from LA, but keeping my job in the campus. I loved the student body that we had. It was very diverse, and it was largely, 83 languages were spoken on the campus, so it gives you an idea of the ultimate diversity of it. And most of the students were second career people, so they were people with lots of life experience. I loved it. But something was pulling me away from the city. So at first I moved to the Ojai Valley, which is a couple hours north of LA. And I would commute from there in to teach in LA so that I could keep these connection to the city, but I didn't want to live in the city. And then from there I moved to North San Diego County. And then from there I moved into the mountains behind San Diego, Mount Laguna. And I lived in a little cabin in a wilderness area and commuted to LA.
But by getting more detached and more isolated, more
further away. The big jump to Santa Fe, which is a 12-hour drive. And I really couldn't anymore. But what I did was 440 week. So I'd fly out there on Monday morning, fly back on Thursday evening, and lived in my office on a futon and showered in the gym, ate in the cafeteria, and worked 10 days. And it was wonderful. And I was totally immersed in the city. And then I was totally immersed in nature for half the week.
Beautiful.
So and all the summer, of course. So that has continued, actually. Now, oddly enough, and now that I live out here, I'm in a relationship with a woman who lives in East LA. And I am now continuing to travel to California.
Yeah, that's your billboard, isn't it?
It amazed me that it worked out this way. So the image is like it's a wheel, and it's like a wheel. And the very center of the circle is urban Los Angeles. Yeah. And then the spokes go out to all of these nature places. And that round the rim is a big journey in nature. I don't want to separate nature from LA, but in pristine wilderness, sort of wilderness.
Yes, yes, yeah. The extreme on the spectrum
I'm
of
more
wilderness.
wild.
Yeah.
Yeah, because even when I was a little kid with that wild lot across the street, we had our yard, which was manicured, so in the everything was orderly. Talk about order and disorder. In the yard, there was no disorder. It wasn't allowed. If there were no dead spots in the lawn, everything was weeded. And I've thought a lot about weeds.
Yeah. What
Across
is yes.
across the street was nothing but weeds. It was complete disorder, it seemed to me. And so there's this balance of an orderly place you could retreat to, go out to disorder and chaos. So.
And were you orientated towards to the wild allotment? Did you find yourself there more?
No, not in those
Yeah.
years. In those years, I was much more contained at the house.
Yeah.
The first connection I had to really the wider world of nature was through my dad, who loved mountains. And so he had a job where he had 2 weeks of vacation every summer. And fairly early on, we started taking camping trips on those 2 weeks. And so with a tent, sleeping bags, we would head out, and our old station wagon, wood paneled station wagon, and we'd head out to find a place to camp. And those were amazing journeys and wonderful experiences of family, and a deep immersion in nature, because we were often in places where there weren't many other people.
Well, that, I mean, in terms of that's probably giving your family gave you the taste for that.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Your mum obviously coped with the wildness of the camping.
I think that's kind of a good way to put it. She coped with it. She was very involved. Economically, things were so tight that we couldn't consider eating out. So she fixed all of our meals before we left home and had them all prepared in ice boxes. And so she would come along then, and she cooked, and she participated, but she really she loved being at camp. She didn't much want to go out on hikes, and so I learned that there are these two worlds, which of course in Native American lore they talk about man space and woman space, which is of course gender-wise pretty stereotyped and offensive in some ways now. But in that traditional view, man's space was all the space outside the home, and woman's space was very much the area right in the pueblo and the home. And so I learned both of those worlds archetypally correctly, in the sense that my mother was very much representing this home world, and my dad was very much representing the outside the home world. At home, he was hardly present, because at home he was exhausted from working outside the home. And so he'd come home and he'd sit there with his newspaper in front of him and his pipe, and we would be instructed not to bother him. So these summer camps were wonderful experiences, because then we got to really be with him in his world. And they extended into, in my teenage years, into backpacking trips in the Sierras, where he and I and my brother and a couple of male friends, I don't think we ever had, I don't think my sister ever, yes, she did. So my sister was involved sometimes, but not much. We did the Muir Trail up on the top of the Sierras, not all at once, but we took pieces of it each year. And those were exquisite experiences. And they certainly whetted my appetite for wanting to do wilderness work, and for the whole attraction to being at the ranch.
But what a wonderful experience with your dad, or that family, just hiking in that way.
Oh yeah, those were stunning trips. They were also not the complete vision, in the sense that they very much focused on beauty. We were looking for the beautiful scenes, the beautiful overlooks, the place to take a great photograph. And so we were very tuned into the beautiful, lovely, wonderful side of nature. And we were not at all connected, virtually unconnected from the dark side of nature, the suffering side. Um, there were exceptions from time to time. The one exception I remember had to do with lightning, which was that we were up on the top of Kearsarge Pass, which is a really high point in the Sierras, and a thunderstorm came over us, and we were way above tree line, so there was nothing but rocks around us, and they were not that big. And the storm started lightning, and we felt extremely vulnerable, and so we just literally ran with backpacks down the trail until we could get down in the trees. I injured my knee doing that. That's been a lifelong injury. But that was an eruption of the shadow in nature, which felt to me like worth seeing. That sometimes, but I had another experience as a child that I remembered recently in Yosemite. We were camping on one of our camping trips, one of our beauty-oriented camping trips. And there were some deer who were coming into camp there because they'd been so accustomed to people that they were no longer spooked by people. They wandered around and you could practically hand feed them, although you weren't supposed to. And I walked up to one of them. I was, I think, about 8. And it, for some reason, got spooked and it reared up and was going to come down on me. And yeah, it was extremely close, a very near miss. My folks yelled and screamed and it backed off. But those were there were a few experiences like that where I could see, well, nature does have a dangerous side, that it's not all beautiful sunsets, although those are exquisite.
Yeah. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, of the times of lightning at Dragonback Ranch, how you were very alert to that. Yes, I can understand that that's quite an informative experience, especially if you've still got the knee injury from that.
Yes. I love lightning, but I do like to be sheltered indoors.
Yeah.
We're in a car.
Yeah.
We had an experience on one of those retreats. We were on the land by Ghost Ranch, and out in the primitive area behind Ghost Ranch. And we were just beginning to set up camp there. There were about 12 of us. And a huge lightning storm came up, roared up off the river. And the first bolt struck about 8 feet from my car. I was sitting on a table, and I looked, and we all looked at each other. And we decided we would all get in our cars. So we all jumped in cars. And the next bolt hit about 5 feet from the door of my car while I was sitting inside. And it hit so powerfully that I saw the earth turn red, with a big red circle on the earth about a couple feet in diameter. It was really stunning. I'd never seen anything like that.
Yeah, for sure.
So yes, the power of lightning, but also the sense of connection. You know, whoa, what a connection between earth and sky.
Yeah. And wow, yes. I'm imagining like 5 meters. That's not far of that happening. I'm just quite struck by that.
Well, I was too.
Wow. And so this sort of, your deepening connection of the beauty and the shadow of nature, and how did that deepen evolve in terms of into wilderness therapy, or how did it inform your you were professor doing with human development and psychology?
Well, I do think that I became aware of the gradually being around nature more. If you're in nature long enough and you're not just passing through, in the passing through mode, you see mostly the beauty. But if you settle into a spot for a while, like out there at the retreat, or even in my yard here, if I set into a spot and begin to really connect with what's around me, it doesn't take long to start seeing shadow. You see the ants that I stepped on, as I walked out the door. I see the decay happening in a tree. it's occurred to me lately that it's really peculiar that if a tree gets a dead branch, we cut it off.
Mm.
You know, why do we do that?
Mm.
Why do we take a dead branch off of a tree so that it will look pretty again? It's like we don't actually want it to look like itself. We want it to look in a kind of archetypally beautiful form, or some kind of culturally defined form. Even, you know, in people's lawns, lots in LA, I see many people manicure their trees um, and shape them. You know, they shape them into interesting shapes, maybe a round globe. Uh, there's
Yeah, the art form. What is the Japanese art form of that?
yeah,
Mm.
yeah.
Whatever
What's
the
it
name
called?
is. Yeah.
One of the wonderful things about
Bonsai. Is it bonsai? Sort of that art
bonsai.
form. Is it bonsai? Yeah.
Yeah, so we're constantly manicuring plants in our own little space, but we don't get to do that out in the wilderness, or at least it's kind of a hopeless job. Right now, I think well, you observed the dying trees out there when we were there. That process continues. There's probably half the pine trees in Colorado have died through this beetle. And so the intriguing thing is there are areas that I drive through up there where um, on first glance you think, boy, the whole thing has died, the whole forest is dead. And then if you look closer, there's all kinds of little trees, little 2 and 3 foot tall trees growing everywhere. And they all look very healthy. The beetles don't seem to be bothering them. I don't know why. But in any case, we can't clean that up. When it first started happening, people were talking about doing massive logging of the dead trees because they are, of course, a fire danger. And lightning started fires in those forests, spread incredibly fast because of all the dead lumber that's standing there. And some of the aspen trees around the ranch now have died. And so there's a different disease affecting aspens from the beetles that are affecting the pine trees. The aspens, it's a fungus of some kind. And so it's really interesting that in nature, nobody is manicuring it. In nature, nobody, except in a national park. You get into a national park here, and then, yeah, they're trying to take out the dead trees, make it look pretty. It's really a disservice to people, because if people really want to experience the wilderness fully, they must experience the dark side of it as well. And so I love that in the retreat, very often when people come back in from their fast, they'll come in with a bone, you know, that they found out there, or a skull, or a hip bone, or something that very clearly talks about the presence of death. And I love that that really moves people, and they often take those home to remind them of the presence of death, and that it's not a bad thing. You know,
I've got the bone from your ranch
ah,
sitting over there.
oh, yeah. So there's something when people get so connected to these signs of death, it shows how important it is to, and that's part of why people go out into nature, although they don't know it. You know, when they first go into nature, they love the nourishment, the feeling of beauty, and to feel nourished by a skull is a stretch. You know, it certainly can happen. Certainly, absolutely can happen, but it's a stretch to expand your definition of what is nature, what is natural.
And to be with that cycle of, you know, sitting with something that's dying and seeing the life in it, or seeing the tree with its part of its dead branch, but also seeing how it is vibrant, that paradox of that.
Yes.
And but it's you know, a couple of things what you've just said in terms of how we control, you know, even in we want to make it as if it should be a particular type of a tree or a particular shape, and how we want to see it, how we hide that darkness, and how we want to control.
Oh, we even uproot plants, kill them in effect, if they're not looking pretty anymore, and replace them with something that is pretty.
Yeah. And have you ever seen an ugly tree?
No,
Never.
no, I
Never.
have to,
They're all individuals.
yes, even the dead ones,
Yeah.
even the dead ones. They're,
Mm.
you look at one long enough, you begin to see its pattern, its life, its history. Um, and, and there are plenty of examples of that now. And of course, at this time, um, interestingly, one of the explanations for why the trees in Colorado are having so much trouble right now is that they became overpopulated. They grew too close to each other, and we went through 100 years of trying to prevent forest fire. And so any little fire would get immediately extinguished. And so the trees were just allowed to keep getting denser and denser and denser. And then along came a drought 10 years ago, and which continues now, and off and on. And that drought meant that the trees had to compete with each other for water because they had grown so close to each other. And so that process caused a weakening of their defenses uh, against the beetles. And so the beetles had free access to all of these trees that were not able to get enough water, partly because of drought and partly because of overpopulation. So the notion of, but to me, that the interesting thing about that is that overpopulation isn't just a human thing. No, humans, we talk about that we've gone from 1 billion to 6 billion in 100 years. Well, that's kind of awesome. Really quite awesome. And then there's a kind of moralistic view of that that says we're bad for having done that. That we're a bad species because we are overpopulating the world and we have to stop doing that. Well, yes and no. In a sense, you can't say that to the trees. You can't say to them, you know, you're bad trees because you're overpopulating your world and you're going to die out and then you're going to leave us with a bunch of dead trees and you're taking away our beautiful nature, and don't you have a moral, you know, we can go on with, but it's the same story, the exact same story. The only difference is that we attribute to ourselves consciousness that and the moral obligation to make decisions about what we do and don't do that are fueled by a more rational process and less by an instinctual one. And I think lately I'm coming to the view that overpopulation is a natural process. And any species will do it if it has enough room. And that includes trees and plants.
The opportunity to do that, take the opportunity.
Until something stops you. Yeah. And so interesting now, the virus comes along. And the virus has the same tendency. It's overpopulating itself. It loves to spread. I find a curious notion about viruses because I read that they're not alive. And so, well, that's, I can understand. But bacteria are alive. So bacteria are alive, but viruses are not. Viruses are chemical compounds. So at least that's what I read. So then the question is, well, what is it that propels them? What propels a chemical thing to multiply out of control? And we don't know. But anyway, the virus has the same situation. It's overpopulating. And it's a danger, an increasing danger, because human overpopulation gives it a vehicle to transport. So with all of these 6 billion people now, it's got a free ride to go anywhere in the world. And it's doing that. It's just naturally traveling throughout the world. It's kind of on its own journey into nature, I guess. 2-week vacation, only it's longer. And, and that's all it is. It's just another overpopulation out of control. And the question, of course, is what's the impact of that going to be? And we truly don't know. I think we actually really are up against something that could be quite a threat to the existence of humans
Mm.
over time.
Mm. Can I actually, that might be a point of pausing to introduce your amazing paper,
Oh, okay.
Psych and Annihilation. And I think, because I think we'll loop back, because I might, yes, because you wrote this incredible paper in 1985, wasn't it? And it was a spring volume, Psychological Perspectives. And
Mm-hmm.
it really struck me. I mean, you gave it to me maybe last year, but I just, there's so much there, Ray. There was one, so I'll read out a few
Mm-hmm.
quotes from it, yeah? So, so this is in terms of there was a fear of, in the context of nuclear war and the anxiety around that, which is not good parallels of obviously now for eco anxiety around climate
Mm-hmm.
change. But
Yes.
and you said, I was quite surprised to see that the material I gathered gradually moved in quite a different direction, taking the toward a strange sort of embrace with and study of the image of annihilation rather than a prescription for avoiding it. And things like, success and failure as a species are measured neither by endurance nor by extinction. The question, what does it mean at the level of the collective psyche to include extinction as a future step in the history of the human race? I mean, and this one, I love, nature and the collective unconscious are firmly rooted in each other beyond mankind. They have been through the extinction chain creation cycles countless times, and somewhere deep in our own unconscious psyches, this pattern is understood and accepted.
Mm. Mm. I like hearing that.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. I mean, yeah. So, what's your wrap on psyche and annihilation in the
Uh,
human race and where we are in this particular time in the
yeah.
world?
Well, on the grand scale of things, we all know that the entire universe is on a time clock. The whole universe that we know will cease to exist. We don't know exactly when. It's some number of billions of years. The whole thing is going to end. And this planet is going to end long before that. So the awareness that everything is temporary is something that we know. We know it on a universal scale. But in some kind of way, we tend to exempt ourselves from it. So we tend to think, well, humans really will be here as long as the Earth is. And that's undoubtedly not true. Um, there's no species that's existed long enough to last another couple billion years. So we have gone about as long as most species that endure. There are exceptions. Cockroaches will be here forever, maybe. But for the most part, all species are temporary, and that's not a tragedy. But when humans become temporary, that's a tragedy in our feeling about things. And that's probably, I suppose every species would feel that about itself if it had self-awareness, that it's not okay somehow that we are included in nature. It's not okay that we are included in the process that is so overwhelmingly natural and unavoidable. And so in a personal life, of course, that's true. We know that our personal life is going to end, although in religious contexts, you can say, yes, but there's a part of you that will survive and is eternal, that will live forever. I guess that means it will live beyond the universe even. But if we hold it to the physical world, the physical self, yes, it's a lifespan. And it's a lifespan for some people is very short, other people quite long, wonderfully, sometimes not so wonderfully. Um, but the awareness of death, I heard recently that your own death is the most important fact of your life. And that, and it's a fact that should override every other fact in everything you do, an awareness of your death, because it's
And
the
your
most.
birth, I guess.
Hmm?
And your birth.
Yes, yes, I think so. Right. Yes,
Mm.
starting with birth. And
Mm.
interestingly, the word nature um, basically means birth. Comes from the Latin that
Yeah, no,
birth.
yeah.
Yeah. So one definition of nature is anything that's been born, anything that's capable of being born. Well, that can exclude some things, like I guess it excludes a rock, maybe, because I don't think rocks go through birth necessarily. So there's some room for redefining that, I think, expanding the definition, but being able to come into existence and then to go out of existence, well, that's nature, maybe.
Yeah.
And in that sense, everything is nature. You know, there isn't anything that doesn't come into existence and go out of existence. And so when we talk about going out to get into nature, well, that's kind of unnecessary because I'm in the midst of nature. Everything is everything here has gone through a creation process and is going to decline and decay and go through a death process. So one can be in nature. One is in nature every instant of life, but we insulate ourselves from it a great deal. Partly, I think, because we want to keep the shadow side of it out. Inside my house, if I'm conscientious about it, I can keep it clean. I can keep it bug-free, more or less. Um, so the inside my house, I have the option of trying to maintain the illusion of a positive life without a negative side. But of course, if Jung taught us anything, the most central thing he taught us was the need to observe the opposites. And that for each angle of ourselves, there is an opposite angle that needs to be incorporated. Doesn't necessarily need to be acted out, but we need to, as not all the positive sides need to be acted out either. But we need to know it's there, and we need to build it into our life in a certain way. It's not know it's there so that we can keep it out. It's know it's there so that we can admit it into our awareness in a meaningful way. And certainly our own death is something that we have to do that with. And we're being faced with that with this whole virus thing. Any one of us could be dead 2 weeks from now, now in a very realistic way, not just hyperbole. And that's kind of stunning.
Do you think in this, I'm jumping around really, but do you think that because of the coronavirus, that sort of awareness, that closeness to that will burst, will accelerate consciousness?
God, I would love to think so. It seems to me that it's doing that, but for it to really do that, I think we're going to have to go through some very dark times.
But are we sitting with it? Like you said, if you sit long enough, in in nature, you'll see the dead tree. But have we, even subconsciously, we have been sitting looking at the darkness, and so that itself will accelerate.
Yes, but we still have a significant proportion of our population, maybe 30% in the United States, 30 to 35%, who are absolutely denying the dark side of it. It's not that bad. It's going to go away. We have a president who is promoting that view. So it's easy for people who are afraid of the dark side to simply get under his wing and hope for the best. So we still have a substantial disagreement among our population about, is this something that we need to incorporate, or is it something we can somehow escape? And
well, yeah. Oh, sorry, I'm interrupting.
the potential for escaping is still, I mean, like that's kind of the view of lock it down, close all the stores, close everything, get in your house and wait it out. In a way, that's an escapist view, effort. I understand it, and I'm doing it. I'm certainly doing it. I'm minimizing contact with people in desire not to connect with the darker side of it. But as a culture, as individuals, we can do that. But as a culture, as a civilization, we can't do that, because we already have vast numbers of people who have no income, who have no food supply, who are living on food banks at the moment. But the price of shutting everything down is causing enormous unemployment. And so it's a different kind of disorder, a different kind of darkness, but that darkness is every bit as bad as the darkness of getting sick and potentially one of the people who dies. A part of me feels, Penelope, like the awareness of the risk of being killed by this, or of dying because of this, that should be a natural experience. And it should be, it's just like I live with a certain possibility that a tree could fall on me at any time. And if it did, I might die. Now I can try to avoid that if it's possible, but I can't. If I avoid it too much, I interfere with life, my life and other people's lives. Like I could keep everybody off the retreat, so nobody could possibly get hurt by a falling tree. And we have a lot of dead trees up there now, and it bothers me that when we have groups go up there, I can't guarantee that they won't be hurt by a falling tree. Well, the same thing is true with the virus. If we go out, we can't guarantee that we're not going to get the virus. But if we don't go out, we stop the flow of life in a certain kind of way that harms people deeply in another way. So I don't know what the solution to that is, but I also think, they talk about herd immunity, that what we're aiming for is some sort of way of getting the population immune enough so that the virus can't travel rapidly around. To get there, something like 60% of us have to be exposed. Well, if we're all sitting in our houses, avoiding exposure, that's going to be pretty hard to pull off. And so what we are doing is, they talk about flattening the curve and keeping the incidence of new cases manageable, partly because that way we have enough hospital beds and nurses and doctors and all of that, which is very strained again here now with this new wave that's happening. More and more cities are running out of hospital beds. And so the question is, if we try to avoid that, if we do too much to lower the curve, we'll never reach the end of this. It will just keep moving. It'll keep expanding. At some point, no matter what we do, 60% of us have to get this thing. And out of that 60%, some percentage of us will die. And we are, at the moment, overplaying that, I think, because actually the death rate of people who actually get the disease is well under 5%, no matter what age you are, and under 1% for younger people. So yes, we have to play those odds in a way. We have to live with those odds. And it's not such a bad thing, except for the 5% who die. And yet, if we overemphasize our trying to keep it out, more people will die from malnutrition. And this virus gives us a perfect laboratory to think about our connection to life and death, and to what's the role of civilization in manipulating the story. Manipulate it a certain extent, but every way that we manipulate it creates shadow on the other side. That's about, forever. That if you create light, you create shadow.
Reminds me of a game at a fairground where the alligators, and you have to bang the alligator's head, and
Hack 'em.
yeah, and then one pops up. Something will always pop up. But whether it's the coronavirus or climate change or nuclear war, it's the same principle, isn't it?
Yes.
Of this control, order, disorder, going back to your garden and the wild side. It's that's it, isn't it? That's the dance that we have to get comfortable with.
My introduction to the nuclear issue, which I talk about in that paper, happened when I was 12 or 13, and my dad's job took him to work in Boulder Dam for a while out near Las Vegas. And so we were there for a year, and it happened to be the year when there was a lot of above ground nuclear testing going on. And it was going on in the Nevada desert, about maybe 100 miles from where we were. And so it was a grand adventure. When the government was going to do a test, they always did them at night. So when they were going to do a test, they would announce it, and they would announce what time it was going to go off. And everybody in this little town, Boulder City, would get in their cars. They'd get up at 3 in the morning and get in their cars and go out to this road where you could park on the side of the road and see the thing go off. And it was spectacular. I think I saw 4 or 5 of those tests with the extraordinary column of light, and then we would wait for the earthquake to come through, the vibration in the earth, which took quite a while to get that 100 miles. It was an adventure, it was as much of an adventure as climbing up onto the mountain in the Sierra. So my first introduction to the nuclear thing was that there's this odd kind of beauty in it.
Yeah.
I had an uncle who worked on the original bomb and was part of the team that worked on the trigger. And he carried with him the rest of his life the dual feelings, extraordinary guilt that he carried. And also a sense of the stunning majesty of what nature is able to do. And of course, the whole nuclear thing is a natural process. The sun is nuclear. Without the nuclear reactions in the sun, we wouldn't have heat or light. We wouldn't have so just where it is and when it goes off. That is the big problem. And of course, then you have nuclear energy. The same process, under the right amount of control, might be a reasonable approach to energy creation. But in space that can't be put anywhere, you don't know what to do with it. So there's shadow and light everywhere you look.
And so your paper around, like in terms of, I don't know, the answer of dancing with that shadow and light and shadow, or the order and the disorder. What have you learned from that?
Well, it is the way to be oneself, because to try to manipulate the balance is throwing yourself off balance. So to really feel my own existence as fully as I can, I have to be able to acknowledge the shadow disruptive side of it, along with the creative, positive side of it. I've been a negative influence in some people's lives, and I'm aware of that. I carry it. People were hurt because of me being myself, and that's, if you live a real life, I think that has to be true. I don't think there's a way to go through life without hurting anybody. Not deliberately hurting them necessarily, but being yourself. That to be oneself means that the dark side must be owned. And that means to some degree that it must be expressed. And that's the hard part.
Yeah. And what have been sort of the experiences in nature where you've really, where that's have come, that's helped you make sense of that?
Well, I think when I go out on a fast, on my own fast, and I'm sitting for hours for 4 days with just water, there is a kind of intimacy, that immersion. It's an immersion that happens. You know, the organization is called the School of Lost Borders, and the meaning of that is that you go out there with the intention of losing the boundary between you and the rest of the world around you, letting go of this boundary that we've constructed so carefully our whole lifetime, that's represented by the walls of my house, so that I can keep out what I don't want in, and I can let in what I want to keep, and keep it in. So the starting point for the fast really is the opportunity to dissolve the border, that you go into an experience of no borders, which means you and I and the tree and the ants and the deer and the elk and the owls and the dung shit on the ground, the potential for floods, the potential for being washed out of my spot.
Lightning.
Yes, that, and I see it all there. And that if I let the boundaries down, if I go to losing the borders, I begin to feel the truth that I'm part of all that. So that everything I see out there, the bones, the food chain, everything that I see, the decay, the damage on the trees from lightning, death happening all around me, and birth. And all of that is experienced because the boundaries are gone. And so that's the potential of going out into the wilderness, because it's harder to get to a place where there are no boundaries screened, where there are no filters in what you're experiencing, other than in the wilderness.
That's so true.
Get out there far enough into the wilderness, and there are no filters. It's you and that. And you become, over that 4 days of the fast, you become aware of the immersion, that it's all one. I love the word alone, which also mean, if you just break it up a little differently, it's all one. So so to go out there and be all one is quite a revelation. And people come back the first time with a stunning feeling of connection. And then the question is, how do you keep that connection when you come back into the world of boundaries and borders and filters? And so ideally, we learn to how to pass into a space where there are no filters. And I can do that sitting in my yard. I have a wonderful dead tree out in the yard. It's a 100-year-old apple tree that was massive and gorgeous and full of apples when I first started living here 35 years ago. And 2 years ago, it fell over. It died, and it fell over in the front yard. It's a big presence. You can't put your arms around the trunk. It's so big, and it's about 25 feet long, and it's right in the middle of my lawn. And the first inclination, well, we had workers come out to cut it up and try to remove it, and they cut most of the branches, and then there's this giant trunk left, which they were talking about how to deal with that, how to cut it up and take it away. And it occurred to me that I didn't want them to do that. That there's something unbelievably beautiful about it. It's a sculpture. It's literally a sculpture right in my yard of this tree that reminds me of the wholeness of life. And it's like it's not an intruder. It's it was here before I was, and all it did was go through a natural stage of its life. And so now I should remove it. Well, I don't know. It's been 2 years and it's still there. Maybe someday, I don't know. But some friends were living here for a little while, and they had a little boy, and they had a little toy of his that it was like he could climb 2 or 3 steps on this little plastic stool and sit on the top. They set that up right next to the tree, and it was gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. He could climb up that and sit right up in the trunk, dead trunk. It's a play yard. They made a play yard out of this playground, out of a tree.
For sure.
It's I love its presence. I sit out by it and read, and feel that it belongs.
Yeah, sure. And I'm sorry, you were all set up to sit beside it.
Yes.
At it for this chat, and I took you inside. Yeah.
Well, when we finish, I'll go out there just out there and give you a picture of it.
Yeah, lovely. So beautiful.
It really is a major symbol for me now, and of course of my own life, and that I'm going to topple over like that at some point. And wherever I'd kind of like to stay.
Yeah. Yeah. So what if like it is a particular time in life, isn't it? I mean, and you're helping your Maria's mum to transition.
Yes.
And your own, your own mortality, and also I guess there's also something for me about being like a conscious elder. So I'm sort of wrapping them all up. But sort of, where are you at with that? And what lovely lessons can we learn around stepping into that eldership and really that fullness?
Well, one of the lessons for me, touchstones for me, was Carlos Castaneda, when he wrote, "No one is able to be fully alive until they are aware of their death sitting on the mat beside them." And that quote, I think it's in A Separate Reality, that quote that's been a touchstone for me for many years. That as a therapist, part of my job very often is to help people get connected to an awareness of this most important event of their life, that their death is coming. The other touchstone for me that comes back quite often is Anwar Sadat, who was quoted at one time as saying that he spent the first half of his life building his home and the second half of his life building his tomb. And to me, that feels absolutely correct. And so there is a point where, like, building your home is a process of creating order, and building your tomb is allowing for decay, allowing for disorder, allowing for deforming with the form that was created in the first half. So that's the image that I feel I want to express with people, that your death represents an important bookmark on your life. It's a bookend on your bookshelf, and it's um, needs to be consciously thought about and brought forward in a really conscious way over, ideally, in Anwar Sadat's model, from middle age on. There should be really clear focusing on death. We're not doing that. We tend to put the point of changing the focus, or at least bringing up the other side of death. We don't really push on doing that until you retire, at least. Maybe 65 at one time, when you would have 3 or 4 years to enjoy before you died. Well, now 65 is like midlife, sort of, except we're still retiring then. So we retire and have 20 years left, or 30 years, or sometimes 40 years. And so you wonder, well, did I start thinking about death too soon? And no, I don't think so. I think it would be, a lot of life would feel different and would get shaped differently if people began to raise awareness of their death when they're 40. You know, they would. It's not that it becomes oppressive or that it takes over, but it begins to rise in awareness to as an equal balance between the birthing years, the growing years, and the declining years. And that the declining years are every bit as important as the birthing years, and that they serve the function of creating wholeness. And Jung's notion of a lifelong goal is exactly that, to be whole, which he very carefully talks about as not being perfect. It's not becoming complete and perfect, but it's being wholly who you are. So all aspects, and that means the creating aspects and the destroying aspects, construction and deconstruction. And so I've now become aware of all the thought that's been given by people to that notion that construction and deconstruction is a circular process that should be going on every minute of every hour of every life. That, and we talk about that, with the 4 shields, that you can think about going through those 4 stages once in a lifetime, and that's true. But you can also think about going through them once a year, and that's also true. And you can think about going through them once an hour and once a day, and even multiple times a day. So this process of constructing and deconstructing, we should be thinking of that as the underlying principle of everything. And so everything, every moment, has both birthing and dying in it. And if we could get away from the linear view of progress, we would open the door to people being able to experience the circular view, which really does honor dying as absolutely as valuable and good and worthy and nourishing as birth is.
And that's at an individual level, and also in terms of an organizational level, we're not honoring that linear pursuit for growth and progress is where where the damage is creating, and not allowing for that deconstruction or seeing it in a negative way and
yes,
wanting to avoid it.
Yeah, and the more sophisticated our cultures become, the more true that becomes. So back in the hunter-gatherer years, I would imagine that it would have been much easier to be aware of that circle and to apply it to everything. You could apply it to your village. You could apply it to your house. You could apply it to your relationships. You could apply it to everything around you. It was really easy because it was true and you could feel it.
Yeah, so
totally temporary everything is. But as we've gotten more and more elaborate now, more building with concrete, so to speak, we have made it much harder to take apart what we put together. You had a little hunter-gatherer village, you could decide you wanted to move it, and you could put it down and move. You can't do that now. You can't move Los Angeles somewhere else. you can't change very much in human civilization the way it is now on a short-term basis. On the long-term basis, of course, it's all on that cycle, and it will all decay someday. Um, but um, but not in an individual's lifetime. So what happens? There's a kind of a separation starts to happen between our individual lifetime and what we see around us. What's around me is I can think of it as eternal, sort of. You know, the cities are and the freeways, and they're pretty much eternal as far as the lifespan of human civilization goes. But that kind of robs me of my ability to feel that order and disorder are normal and natural, and it's not that something's wrong's going to happen. I'm going to die. But it's very hard not to fall into that.
And see that as good or good or bad or
Yeah.
negative, positive, or
yeah. And that's why your death is the most important fact. It's the most important fact, because once you become aware of that, everything else takes on a different color, a different tone.
When did you start thinking about yours?
Certainly not in the first half of my life. I think probably the place where one often does first begin to be aware of one's own death is the death of one's parents, or if there were a close family member who died, maybe, or a friend. So, or a pet. Often, so the death of somebody important to you often is the first time. My folks lived well into my 60s, so I didn't experience. My grandparents, of course, I experienced their deaths, but not very much. I wasn't present. I went to a couple of funerals. I have not yet been present at a death. I have yet to experience a death. I'm hoping that in this hospice process, I'll be there when she passes. I would love to experience that moment. But I've never experienced that moment. I did experience it with a cat, which was a wonderful experience. I had this cat who I'd had for 20 years, and she was a great orange cat. And I was allergic to cats, so I generally did not touch her or anything. But I was watching a football game on television, and she jumped up onto my lap and curled up on my lap and died. It was the most amazing thing.
Died on your lap.
Yeah, I was petting her and trying not to breathe in the hair, and realized all of a sudden that she wasn't breathing anymore. And so that's the only experience I've had of being present at a death. And it was wonderful. It was absolutely wonderful.
She chose your lap. That's nice.
Yeah.
And once again, that paradox, you're always dancing with that paradox of your allergy.
Yes.
Even then till then.
Yeah, so real thoughts of my own death as coming. I've been accident prone over the last, not my whole life, but certainly the last 15 years. The first, and this probably was the first, my first experience of this chain of accidents. There's 5 or 6 now, any one of which could have been fatal. I've been charmed to have gone through these experiences without dying. So one of them, I ended up having to get flown by helicopter to have ribs fixed, and anyway. But this one was about almost 20 years ago. It was my first, not my first fast, but it was in a series of fasts that I did when I first began experiencing this process with the School of Lost Borders. And so this particular fast was in Death Valley, appropriately enough. And I had done my very first fast in Death Valley, and these were winter fasts. They've modified that some now. They don't do them in January anymore, but weather in January has become less reliable in Death Valley. Sometimes it can snow a lot. I was there a couple of years after this experience, and it snowed so much we couldn't see the road driving out. Couldn't even tell where the road was. But at this time, it was they were done at New Year's, so it was done so that you would be out on your 4-day fast on your solo time while over New Year's Eve, and which was a little surreal because you could see the lights of Las Vegas lighting.
Another paradox.
Yes, it was just a glow in the sky, distant, but it was there.
Yeah.
So yes, I had done it a couple of times there before, and we were in Hanapaval Canyon, which is a dry canyon, and we were all going out looking for our spots, and I talked them into letting me go up on a ridge. They didn't really want people to go on the ridges, but I convinced them that I had been there before, and so I could be careful. So I carted all my stuff up this little animal trail on the side of a dry waterfall, a dry riverbed, and it was kind of on the side of the hill, this animal path, but it was safe. And I walked up with no problems, sat up there, set my tent up, and then a whole lot of wind came up, and it lasted for days. And it was so windy that it was cold, and you really couldn't go outside. And so all of us ended up pretty much spending the whole fast in our tents. And so I was lying on my sleeping bag in the tent, and I had this book of poetry with me. It's Robert Bly's Something of the Bones. I forget now what it's the total. Something and the Bones, anyway. Rags and Bones, something like that. And it's not all his poetry. He's collected poetry of other people. So this particular poem, I can't recite it. I don't have it by memory, but it's about the importance that there is in the corner of the bar of life an alluring woman, a woman from the mountains of Bulgaria, and she dances a wild dance. And you feel really drawn to her, and you really want to dance with her. And he builds the scene a little bit, and then he says at the end, so if you dance with her, everything will change. If you don't, tomorrow will be a lot like yesterday. So I had that image in my head, and I was lying in my tent, and I started imagining that the top of my tent, it was a little short backpacking tent, but it had different color top, and it felt like that was her skirt. Like her skirt was this sort of orange color, and then the rest of the tent was a sort of a red color. So it was very much like a dress you might see in a bar with these beautiful colors. And I started imagining that she was present, that the woman from Bulgaria was there, and that the job was, in fact, to dance with her. And so I tried to get connected to her, and for a little while, and then I kind of lost the image, and I went on to other things, and I didn't come back to it, and I forgot all about her. And so I pack up. As we're getting ready to leave, I realize it's going to be hard to carry all this stuff down in my weakened state after 4 days. So I'll take some of it down tonight, and then come back up here and sleep, and tomorrow morning I'll take the rest. So I'm taking the first part down just before sunset. And I'm walking down this little animal trail. And as I get to a certain spot on it, the rock that is on it's a flat rock, tilts with my weight on it. And it tilts me over and throws me off the path onto the side of the hill. And the side of the hill is sloping pretty steeply, grass, and it's sort of grass covered. In January, there actually is some grass in Death Valley. And so it was grassy covered, and it was wet. And I had on it had been raining a little bit, and so I had on a rain breaker, nylon kind of thing, and nylon pants, rain pants, no traction, and I just slid like ice. I was sliding down this side. Well, I knew that down at the bottom of this slide, maybe 30 feet away, it then dropped off into a straight drop for about 15 feet down to the dry, rocky riverbed. There were a couple of bushes. So as I'm sliding down this thing, I'm pulling at bushes, and they're just coming out of the ground. And there is no way to stop my slide. So I slide and slide and slide, and I go over the edge. And I fall the 15 feet and land on my back on a huge slab of granite, a really smooth slab of granite. And before I hit the ground, I put my hands behind my head.
Wow, good instinct.
I hit that really hard, and I did not knock myself out, but it sort of, I don't know how to describe it, but I lost awareness for a moment. And then I opened my eyes, and I realized I'm alive, and this is impossible practically. I'm alive, and I look all around me, and everything is red. Everything is bright, brilliant red. And I think, well, maybe I'm not alive. Maybe, this is somewhere else. Transition process. And then I realize it's the sunset. This is the color of the sunset, and it's like the Bulgarian woman's. And then I realize that she has thrown me off the mountain and caught me. Like she is making a statement that I must dance with her. And if I don't dance
forget
with her,
about her. Yeah.
Absolutely. So she threw me off the mountain and she caught me, which was amazing. So I told that story coming back from the fast. But then 3 days later, I was supposed to go to Alaska. I was supposed to fly to Alaska, where my son was a teacher at the time. In northern Alaska, we were going to do a river sledding thing, going up, dog sleds up a river. It was all planned and everything. And so I got home from Death Valley, got back to Los Angeles, where I was going to park my car in a friend's garage and then go to the airport. And as I'm pulling the car into the garage, I realized that I need to open the back, or that I had the back open. The lid was up high because I had been pulling stuff out of the car that I wasn't going to take and leaving stuff, that I was going to take and leaving stuff in the car that I was not going to take. So then I get in the car and start driving in, and I realized, I didn't pull the back down. So I pull on the handbrake, or no, I shift into park. I open my door, did not pull on the handbrake. I start to go back, and my car somehow shifts out of park. And it turned out that was a known glitch. Other people had that problem. A vibration could cause it to go out of park. So you really had to have the handbrake on. Well, the car shifted into reverse and starts backing out at me. And I'm off to the side of it, but the open door is coming at me, and the wall of the garage is behind me. And the car is in gear, so it's powered. And there's a slight, ever so slight tilt, and it starts to creep back. There's no way for me to go anywhere because the car is right beside me, and there's the door is now blocking my ability to move. And so it crushes me, comes against me, crushes me. Hip fractures, disconnected bladder, all kinds of problems. Fortunately, my partner was there, and she, in some miraculous way, she can't even describe how she did it. She doesn't recall how she did it. She managed to get into the car and shifted out of park, out of reverse into neutral. And then she drove it away from me. Well, if she hadn't done that, I would have died very quickly. There's no doubt about it. So there again, I had the feeling that this Bulgarian woman is serious about this,
Yeah.
really, really serious.
Yeah.
And so that's that.
So what have you learned from that? So that's that, you know, like those, it's so amazing, isn't it? Like those two experiences. And so what does it mean for you? Like I suppose the anima, you know, in terms of
Well,
your
I think what it
relationship with her.
says that when you get an intuition or an intimation of a voice, a message from her, you better hear it, and you better take it really seriously. And so I've tried to develop a practice that if I'm sort of intuitive by nature in Myers-Briggs, so I've learned to trust intuition much more. I didn't listen to intuition much before. Now I listen to it very much. Any little hint, I want to take it really seriously. So,
It sounds like it's good for your health to do that,
oh,
let alone your soul.
oh yes, and it's good for your death. In that, you know, little hints of death are worth taking care of.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I feel like I have developed a stronger connection to the anima, and a more trusting one too. That um, you know, I've been studying Jung for 20 years, 25 years. I started in a training program to become an analyst, and then learned that it didn't really fit me to be part of the organization. I just wasn't going to be able to fit the mold of the rules and regulations and boundaries, borders that any organization has. You know, I learned that I really don't do well by identifying by a label like Jungian. I love his work, but it's better as an outsider. I think I like it. It works better for me as an outsider. And to some extent, that's true of quite a few things that I've learned to honor the notion that separation for me, in terms of those molecules, how close can you get? Well, mine is a little further out.
Yeah.
Distance of close.
Whether it be so professionally or in terms of relationships or
yeah.
And ending up and also from your mum's sort of rules and regulations too. School of lost borders.
Yes, that's quite a journey. Quite she the last thing that I had to separate from her was the religion thing. Because she was so religious. My dad was also, although I think for him it was more intellectual. His father was a Presbyterian minister. But I left the faith, so to speak, in my mid-30s. And that was always something that we never talked about, she and I. The
leaving of the faith.
Well, I mean, she knew.
Mid-30s is actually quite old.
Well, yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah. Actually, my sister beat me to it. She left a couple years earlier when she came home one night after some revelation that happened to her, and had a fire going in the fireplace and threw her prayer book into it and declared herself disconnected from that belief system. And so shortly after she did that, I realized, well, I belong there too. I mean, not real for me now. So there was a long period of time there in life when this was a difference between my mom and I, and we tolerated the difference and didn't talk about it much. I knew that it was painful for her. So when the last time I ever saw her was in a retirement home where they were living, and they were in good health, reasonably good health. My dad was getting a little bit demented, but still very alert. And she was healthy, except that she had gotten kind of overweight from not exercising anymore and eating in the dining room. So I went to visit them, the two of them and me. And when I had just come back from a trip to Egypt, so I had this video camera that they had given me for the trip. And I showed them the video from Egypt. And then while we were sitting there, she said, Ray, do you really think all of that beauty, all of the beauty all around us could happen without a creator? And I said something like, oh yeah, I do. I think it's even more magical that it can happen on its own. And she smiled. And so then we had to leave. So we walked out to the door, and she said, well, Ray, would it be okay if I said a prayer? And I said, of course. And so the three of us held hands in the entryway to their apartment. And she said exactly this. She said, I pray that each of us finds that which makes us most happy. And those are the last words I ever heard her say.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, she died 2 days later from a stroke. She just stood up, fell down.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was
Yeah.
coming together, that was beautiful. That was just unbelievably beautiful to me.
Absolutely. What a gift. Actually, I might just pause there.
Okay.
Will we? Yeah. Will we pause? I know. I loved when actually, and thank you for sharing that. That's a beautiful. That's really touching.
Yeah, it certainly touched the core of me.
Yeah. And I love actually sometimes when you in council, you would say about being happy and about it's happening. Like, yeah, it's where,
yes.
It's where there's a lovely presence to that. Yeah.
Yeah. Word happy.
So I'll ask you. So have you done what makes you happy?
Yes, I think so. I think the discovering that it's okay to be separate, that it's okay to have my distance further apart than I grew up with. I mean, I grew up with all of us very close to each other. It was assumed we wouldn't even believe anything different from each other. That we would all have the same belief, that we would all have very shared experiences. And there certainly are a lot of shared experiences, but a lot of openness, space and separation has opened up.
Yeah.
And I think for me, that's where, yes, happiness comes there.
Beautiful. Yeah. To live your own life fully and
yes.
your own beliefs and your own,
yeah.
your own view of the world and in relation with others and closeness to family. And
there's some notion about becoming whole.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, sweet soul. I'm going to pause there. And it's an invitation to continue the conversation, and we'll do it again and again.
All right.
If we need to, because I would love this. I feel like in conversation with the wisest person I know.
Well, thank you.
Really.
You're a wise person yourself, and I get that you know yourself.
Yeah. And we'll pause here and see you back for the next Earth Converse podcast. Ray and I will continue our conversation. So there'll be other ones on the Earth Converse podcast. So tune in and enjoy nature, one conversation at a time.